Let the scent on his collar wasn't mine. Not the lavender I'd worn for 42 years. This one was sweeter. Younger. Sharp enough to sting. I stood by the laundry sink, holding Walter's shirt like a stranger's skin. The buttons were still warm, and the perfume clung to the seams like it belonged there. He'd left it in the hamper again, like always. Except this time, I noticed. Because this time, I wasn't looking away anymore. We hadn't shared a bed in 8 months. He said his back hurt. Said I snored more than usual. I believed him, because I wanted to. But folks, sometimes truth isn't loud. It's in the silence, the quiet shift in habits. The way a man sets his coffee mug just out of reach. That afternoon, I folded his shirt carefully. Didn't wash it, just placed it on his pillow. He noticed. Didn't say a word. 2 days later, my neighbor Doreen invited me to Sunday brunch. Chicken salad, cold lemonade, and quiet gossip. She leaned over, whispered like it pained her. I saw Walter last week, near the cemetery. He was in the car with Vanessa. You're Vanessa. The fork slipped from my hand. It clattered against china and silence. Doreen looked like she might cry. They were holding hands. I didn't know if I should tell you. I smiled. Took a slow sip of tea, felt the cup tremble just a bit. That's all right, dear, I said. But now I do know. She looked shocked. But something inside me had already shifted. I wasn't angry. I wasn't surprised. I was steady. 43 years of marriage, and it unraveled with the scent of another woman on my linens. I walked home alone that day. Didn't cry, didn't scream. I opened the front door, set my purse down on the old cedar bench, and started writing. Not a letter. Not a journal. A list. Because sometimes, dear, you don't confront betrayal with noise. You meet it with preparation. And I was done pretending. If your daughter-in-law was in your husband's car, would you ask, or would you wait? The porch creaked when I stepped onto it. Not from weight, just memory. It always creaked that way when Walter came home late. I sat in the wicker chair, still facing the garden. Same hydrangeas I planted in '92. Same birdbath he forgot to refill. Only now, it all looked smaller. I thought of Vanessa. The first time Stephen brought her home, she wore heels too high for our gravel driveway. Said my roast was cute and retro. Laughed at my linen napkins. Walter called her refreshing. I'd brushed it off. Told myself I was being sensitive. That she was just young, that I was tired. But deep down I felt the shift. The way Walter listened when she spoke. The way Stephen dimmed around her. Funny how some women shine only when others are fading. That night after brunch, I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch in my robe, watching the shadows on the ceiling shift with every car that passed. By morning, I had 27 names on my list, places, dates, questions. One word underlined 3 times, why. But I already knew the answer. Some men fear aging more than they fear shame. And some women, they weaponize charm like knives. When Walter came home that evening, I served him casserole. Smiled like always. But inside, I was sharpening every word I would not say. And folks, they thought I'd just sign and fade. But I had my own pen, and I wasn't done writing yet. The auditorium smelled like dust and varnish that day. Fall of '77. The janitor called in sick, so Walter volunteered. He was helping fix the risers for the school play. He wasn't faculty. Just the carpenter's son, tool belt slung low, eyes soft but sure. He smiled at me through the haze of sawdust. And I swear, I forgot what I was even rehearsing. I was 23, teaching American history at Fairmont High. My first year. I still graded essays with a red pen and wore heels to class. Walter asked me out using notebook paper. Folded once, neatly. I can't spell Renaissance, but I'd like to take you to dinner. I said yes, though I hated men who used humor to cover gaps. But something in his handwriting told me he was honest. Or trying to be. We married 9 months later. No white dress, just a beige courthouse and a lemon pie made by his aunt. I thought that was romantic. Still do, in a way. Simple meant safe. We bought our home on Chestnut Street for $48,000, 3 bedrooms. Peach wallpaper. He tore up the carpet himself and told me, "This house will have our story in its floors." Stephen was born 2 years too early. His lungs barely caught breath. 17 days in the NICU. I didn't leave once. Walter worked nights back then. Mill job. Steel and heat and sweat. I paid bills, pumped milk, argued with insurance reps who called me, ma'am. Like it meant nothing. And still, I ironed Walter's shirts before every shift. Tucked notes in his lunch, just so he remembered I was there. When his mother's kidneys failed, we took her in. I gave her our guest room, my grandmother's quilt, and the softest light in the house. She said my cooking was flat, and that Stephen needed real haircut. I changed her bedding every third day. I sat beside her when she cried at night, even when she forgot my name. She died holding my hand. Walter kissed my forehead and whispered, "You were good to her." I held on to that more than the condolences. There's a photo from that winter. Walter in a gray suit, Stephen asleep on my lap, my hands too pale against my navy coat. It sits on our mantel even now. The frame cracked, but the memory unbroken. Vanessa once asked why I kept such a sad photo in the living room. I said, because it's the last time we were truly us. She blinked and went back to checking her phone. I taught history for 32 years. Same chalkboard, same dusty maps, same cracked window that whistled in October like clockwork. My students used to draw me in the margins of their notebooks. Big glasses. Bun too tight. One wrote, "You made the past feel like it mattered." I still keep those notes. They're in a blue tin by my sewing machine. I open it on days I feel erased. Because lately I do. Last Thanksgiving, they set the table with name cards. Vanessa's cat had one. I didn't. I asked if there'd been a mix-up. Stephen chuckled, said, "It's no big deal, Mom. You know where to sit. Do I? Do I still have a place in my own family?" I used to fold Stephen's clothes with lavender sheets between layers, so they'd smell like home. Now he buys detergent that smells like metal and ocean spray. I used to make Walter's favorite pie, pecan with too much bourbon. Vanessa says sweets are unhealthy after 70 wine. She replaced it with yogurt parfait. I don't hate her. But she's painted over everything I built like a woman rearranging furniture in a home she never cleaned. The other day, I found an old letter in the back of our filing cabinet. It was the one Walter wrote the night before our wedding. "Dolores, whatever happens, we'll always be us." I read it 5 times, aloud, each time slower. Then I slipped it into a new folder, one I marked with red ink contingency. I don't know what hurt more. That he forgot that letter ever existed, or that I was the only one who remembered. But memory, dear, is a kind of armor, and mine is sharp now. I am not bitter. I am simply no longer blind. They think I'm soft because I don't raise my voice. But silence, when chosen, is its own blade. And I have waited long enough. Next time they look at me like background noise, they'll learn. I've been listening longer than they've been speaking. Sunday dinner used to be sacred. Roast beef, green beans, fresh rolls with honey butter. The table always set with cloth napkins and the good plates. Even when it was just the 3 of us. I used to hum while setting the table. Felt proud lining up the silverware. Now I stood at the edge of my own kitchen, watching Vanessa place takeout boxes on my lace tablecloth. "Don't worry, Dolores," she said, flashing that smile that never touched her eyes. "I figured you'd be tired. DoorDash is a lifesaver." She handed me plastic cutlery. Not even the biodegradable kind. Walter sat in his usual seat, scrolling on his phone. Stephen helped unpack the cartons, not looking up. No one asked me how my day was. I sat down last. I always do now. The clatter of chopsticks on porcelain filled the room. No prayer, no pause. Just chewing and half-laughed stories from a life I no longer recognized. Vanessa was talking about some real estate deal. "Older couples are downsizing everywhere," she said. "Big houses just aren't practical anymore. Too many memories." She looked at me when she said that. Not long. Just enough. I opened my mouth to speak, but Stephen interrupted to ask about interest rates. So I sipped my tea. It had gone cold. Then she said it. I get it. Some folks, they just can't keep up with change. It's not their fault. They're just from another time. She stirred her soy sauce as if she hadn't dropped a grenade. Walter didn't flinch. Stephen laughed softly, like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to. My hand clenched around the napkin. Linen. Hand stitched by my mother. Another time, indeed. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I looked around the table and realized no one would notice if I left. After dinner, I cleared the plates. Vanessa let me. She always does, smug in her charity. Walter disappeared into the den. Stephen left early, claiming an early meeting. Vanessa stayed behind to help. She leaned against the sink, arms crossed. You know, it wouldn't be a bad thing to simplify a little. This house is a lot. I rinsed a plate. Didn't look up. She continued. You've had your time, Dolores. Now it's about what makes sense for everyone. I wiped my hands. Turned to her slowly. Is that so? She blinked. Maybe surprised I'd spoken. I'll think about it, I said. She smiled, satisfied, and left. That night, I went up to the attic. I hadn't been there in years. It still smelled like cedar and mothballs. Old air. Quiet air. I opened the box labeled Photos Pre-2000, took out the album wrapped in flannel. Stephen's baby pictures. His first day of school. Walter holding him on the beach, back when his hair was still thick. And then I found it. The family portrait from 1999. Me, Walter, Stephen. We're all in sweaters. Mine's red. The smile on my face looked real. I held the photo under the single light bulb, then sat on the floor. I ran my thumb along the glass, stopped at my own face, and I thought, she doesn't belong here anymore. Not in this house. Not at that table. Not in that photo. So I opened the frame, tore the photo gently, slow, precise. Like a surgeon, I kept my peace, folded it twice, slipped it into my pocket. The rest went into the fireplace. No flames. Just ashes. The next morning, I made coffee from the old tin. The one I hid in the cabinet no one touches. I sat in the quiet and opened my notebook again. This time, I didn't just write names. I wrote questions. Why now? Why her? Why the silence? And then I wrote one sentence I'd never let myself say out loud. They want me gone. A sex and not in words. But in margins. In missing name cards. In plastic forks. In Sunday dinners where I'm invisible. I stared at that sentence. Felt it land. Felt it settle. Then I drew a line under it. And under that line, I wrote something else. I am not leaving. Observe, let them plan. Let them whisper. I have plans too. And I always set the table last. But I decide what gets served. Walter knocked on my sewing room door like a guest. Didn't even call my name, just tapped and waited. I looked up from my list. He stood there in his beige golf jacket, holding an envelope. We've got a quick appointment at the bank this afternoon, he said. No? Would you like to come? Just a decision already made. What for? I asked, keeping my voice light. Just routine stuff. Title clarification. They're updating our accounts. His hand rubbed the back of his neck. That financial advisor of Vanessa's helped us set it up. Isu us give and not you and me. Awus, as in, him and her. I nodded slowly. All right, let me grab my scarf. The drive was quiet. Walter hummed something tuneless, tapping the steering wheel. I counted the red lights. 3 before he even spoke again. I know you hate paperwork, so I've tried to streamline everything. I smiled, thoughtful of you. We pulled up to Western First Bank, the same place we opened our joint account in 1981. The teller still remembered me. She used to bring me lemon squares in winter. Now she just nodded politely, as if trying to place my face. We sat in a small glass, walled conference room. Everything smelled like printer toner and cold air. The advisor was young, too young to know how old betrayal can feel. He smiled at me like I was a pet turtle. So, he said, flipping open a folder. Just need Mrs. Hartley's signature to finalize the temporary ownership reassignment. I blinked. Temporary what? Walter shifted in his chair. It's nothing, really. Just gives me access to consolidate the mortgage and the investment statements. Cleaner that way. A cleaner. Like I was clutter. I glanced at the document. Authorization for primary property oversight transfer, bold, underlined, dated last month. My name was printed neatly above a signature. My signature. But I hadn't signed anything last month. Not in person, not by mail, not even by accident. I stared at it. I've been writing my name the same way since I was 9. Rounded D, open E, long tail on the Y. This one was off. Subtle, but wrong. Too stiff. Too calculated. I looked up at Walter. He stared at his watch. "I'm sorry," I said. "I forgot my reading glasses. Can I take a copy home?" The advisor hesitated. Walter smiled quickly. "She just wants to take her time. You know, Dolores." I smiled back. Slow but thorough. The young man nodded and printed a copy, stapled it clean, handed it to me like it didn't weigh a thing. But it did. It weighed 40, 2 years of assumption. On the ride home, Walter was cheerful. Said we should have Thai for dinner. Asked if I'd seen the forecast for next week. I said little. Watched the sun slice through the passenger window and counted the cracks in the windshield. At home, I put the document on the kitchen table, made tea, sat alone, read every word, 3 clauses, 2 loopholes. It gave Walter full authority to refinance, relocate, or release any assets. On the interest of household simplification, no end date, no co-sign, and no mention of me after page 2. My name, once present on every check, every paper, every account, had been pushed to the margin, just like my presence. I opened the drawer under the spice rack, pulled out my old red pen, circled the forged signature, wrote "Does compare ink flow, loop hesitation on each next page, circled, language too broad, seek second opinion." And then I dated the corner. I had taught high school students how to detect Civil War forgeries. I could certainly handle a modern one. Walter passed behind me an hour later. Didn't notice the paper, didn't ask. The next day, I went to the library, scanned the document into my USB, tucked it under a zipper in my coat. The next day, I went to the county clerk's office, requested every property deed under Walter's name. I asked for mine last. The clerk blinked, then said, "It's not showing you as primary owner anymore." "Since when?" I asked. "March 14th. My birthday." Walter had removed me from my own home on my birthday. I said thank you. Took the printout. Didn't cry. I sat in my car for 20 minutes. Didn't turn the ignition. Just watched the wipers twitch against a dry windshield. Back home, I opened the file cabinet in the hall closet. Took out every document I still owned. Lined them on the floor like cards. Marriage license. Mortgage letter. Birth certificate for Stephen. Letter from Walter in 79 that read, "I'll never touch what isn't mine." I highlighted that line. Then I started a new binder. Labeled it, Hartley Estate Review and Protection. And that evening, Walter asked if I wanted to watch TV. I said I was tired. He kissed my cheek, said he loved me, and I believed him once. But love doesn't override signatures. It doesn't scratch your name off a title. I stood in the hallway, watching the TV flicker against his aging face. His jaw still strong, his eyes still quick, but his heart, I wasn't sure it had been mine for years. I looked down at the folder in my hands, pressed the spine flat. "They're moving fast," I whispered. "But I'm not slow." The refrigerator now had a code. Vanessa taped it on the door in pink marker. "Family wellness reset, please ask before snacking." I stood in the kitchen at 6:10 a.m., robe cinched tight, staring at that message. Walter sat in the breakfast nook sipping green juice, reading something about prostate health. He didn't look up. "I was going to make oatmeal," I said softly. "Vanessa's got us on a new plan," he replied. "She reads something about inflammation and cognitive clarity. I've made oatmeal every morning for 40 years. He set the glass down. "Dolores, don't make this about control. It's just food." No, it was more than food. It was routine, memory. It was 1,000 quiet mornings shared over steam and cinnamon. But I didn't say any of that. I just left the kitchen. My stomach growled all the way up the stairs. In the hallway, I saw that the guest linens had been moved, the hallway closet reorganized. My quilt, the one my mother had hand-stitched, was folded wrong, compressed, tucked behind a yoga mat and protein powder. Later that day, I went to fetch my sewing basket. It wasn't where I left it. I found it in the garage, beside the recycling bin. When I asked, Vanessa said. Oh, I just needed space for Emma's craft stuff. Hope that's okay. I smiled. But inside, I felt something settle, cold and final. They were making me smaller. Not directly, but piece by piece. My chair was moved to make space for better flow. My soap replaced with fragrance, free bars. My books, the history volumes I'd collected for decades, relegated to a single shelf, marked nostalgia. The worst part, Stephen never noticed, or if he did, he said nothing. He stopped calling as often. He used to ring every Thursday. Now I hadn't heard his voice in nearly 3 weeks. When I texted to ask if everything was all right, he responded with a thumbs up. A thumbs up. From the boy who once left written cards under my pillow. That night, I sat in the laundry room. The only place they hadn't redecorated. The only room that still smelled like bleach and dryer sheets and the past. I sat on the cold tile, my back against the machine. No tears. Just a stillness. An ache like hollow bone. I remembered something my mother once said. Sometimes, when they stop hearing you, you speak by disappearing. I understood now. This was not just forgetfulness. It was erasure, and it worked. Until Sunday, until Vanessa had a work event. Walter was golfing. Stephen dropped Emma off for the afternoon with a quick, distracted kiss. Hey, sweetie, I said, bending down. Emma hugged me tight. She smelled like grape jelly and crayons. I made her grilled cheese. Cut off the crusts. She sat at the table with her art kit, painting a pink tree with blue apples. Why blue apples? I asked. She grinned. Because rules are boring. After lunch, she wandered upstairs. I heard her footsteps creak across the hallway. Then silence. 20 minutes later, I walked up with folded towels. Her door was cracked. She was sitting on the rug in my old room, flipping through a photo album I hadn't seen in years. I paused. She looked up. Grandma, is this you in the red dress? I nodded. That was my first dance recital, 1959. You look happy, she said. Then quietly added, you look real. I blinked. Something caught in my chest. Later that evening, after Stephen returned to pick her up, I went to clear her plate. There, folded under the napkin, was a note in purple crayon. Grandma, I see you. I love your quiet. Said a heart, a flower, and the smallest drawing of 2 chairs facing each other. My hands shook, not from anger, from something else, recognition, relief. Emma hadn't been coached, hadn't been prompted. She just saw. She saw me. In a house where every adult had chosen blindness, this 9-year-old had kept her eyes open. I sat on the couch, held the note to my chest. It was just a child's scribble, but it weighed more than all the silence I'd been handed lately. I opened my notebook, page 27. I wrote Emma sees me. That means I am still visible, still present, still mine. I added a new tab to the folder, labeled it Aus Heirloom, because if nothing else, Emma would inherit the truth, not the china, not the deeds, but the clarity, the knowing that strength can be soft, that silence can speak, that grandmothers matter, even when no one says it aloud. The invitation came in an ivory envelope with pressed lilacs on the flap. It was from Elaine Hartwell, a woman I'd known since PTA bake sales and school board meetings. Her tea parties were always the kind with cucumber sandwiches, tiny spoons, and too much perfume. She'd written, in looping cursive, Dear Dolores, we'd love to see you again. Just the girls. Sunday at 3. Vanessa found the envelope first. Oh, cute, she chirped, flipping it in her hands. I didn't know folks still did paper invites. She tossed it on the counter like junk mail. Walter glanced at it. You haven't been out in a while. Might be good. Like fresh air or prunes. I didn't answer. Just tucked the card into my recipe book. Between lemon loaf and apple spice bars. Sunday arrived with pale sun and a breeze sharp enough to lift skirts. I wore my navy blouse. The one with tiny buttons too small for swollen fingers. But I still managed. Vanessa drove. Walter insisted on coming. I'll just drop you off, she said. But Walter followed her inside, adjusting his collar like he was walking into court. Elaine's house still smelled like cinnamon potpourri and ambition. The living room buzzed with laughter. 12 women. Some I hadn't seen since Stephen was in diapers. Dolores, Elaine called, arms open. She hugged me tight, perfume clinging like guilt. You look lovely. I wore my memory today, I replied, figured someone had to. That earned a chuckle. Soft, respectful. I settled into the corner chair, the one near the window. Vanessa flitted between groups like a peacock in pearls. Walter joined the husbands in the den, until they ran out of beer and reappeared. It was during the third round of tea that it happened. Elaine asked if I was still quilting. I nodded, said I was finishing a memory square with Emma's old dress. Vanessa laughed, light and airy. She forgets she's told us that story already. Twice. The room stilled. She's been repeating herself a lot lately, Vanessa added, but it's adorable, honestly. She smiled at the others. A performative grin, inviting them in. Walter chuckled. She's got a whole archive of stories on repeat, like a walking jukebox. My teacup trembled slightly on the saucer. Elaine blinked. The woman beside her, Paula, I think, lowered her scone. She ever wander off yet? Vanessa continued, twirling her spoon. We keep teasing that we'll have to put one of those trackers on her phone. A soft laughter. Someone coughed. Walter added, better safe than sorry. You know how it is. And that was when I stood. I didn't say a word, didn't raise my voice, didn't shatter china or storm out. I simply picked up the teapot. Porcelain. Rose patterned. The same style my mother once owned. I walked around the table, refilled every cup, slow, steady. When I reached Vanessa, I met her eyes. Honey, I said softly. Sugar or lemon? Her smile faltered. Lemon, she said. I gave her 2 slices. Then poured. No one spoke. Not even Elaine. I returned to my seat, folded my napkin, and placed it gently on my lap. Then I looked around the room. It's funny, I said. I remember when you all used to come to my house. When your kids were teething. When your husbands lost jobs. When you needed casseroles after surgeries and rides home from book club. Oh, my voice wasn't loud. But it didn't need to be. I guess it's easy to forget what someone did when they stopped doing it. No one met my gaze. I may repeat myself, I said, but at least I don't pretend to know who someone is without earning it. Vanessa shifted. Walter cleared his throat. I sipped my tea. Let silence sit, Elaine finally said. I'm sorry, Dolores. That wasn't fair. I smiled at her. It's all right, dear. Some people need to talk to hear themselves. Others just need to be seen. And in that moment, I felt it. A shift, subtle, but real. Someone placed their hand over mine. I think it was Paula. Someone else moved their chair closer. Even Walter looked smaller. On the drive home, no one spoke. The car smelled like Vanessa's hand lotion. Citrus and something artificial. At one stoplight, she said, Don't take it personally, Dolores. People just joke when they're comfortable. I looked out the window. I hope you're comfortable, Vanessa. Because comfort often reveals character. She didn't reply. Back home, I went to the laundry room. Took out the napkin I'd kept, Emma's drawing still folded inside. I added a new line to my notebook as, let them speak. Let them laugh. The ones who listen will remember the silence more. And that evening, when Walter asked if I wanted to watch the news, I said no. I opened the window instead, let the night air in. Let it wash over me, cool and clean. And I whispered, they see me now. Even if it makes them squirm. The attic never creaked when Walter walked on it, only when I did. It was early Monday morning. The house was quiet. Too quiet for spring. Even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. I wore my old gardening gloves to keep from sneezing. The insulation up there was thin and brittle, like forgotten promises. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just needed to move, to climb, to reach something no one else touched anymore. That's when I found the tin box. Wedged behind a yellowed quilt and 2 photo albums. It was pale green, rusted at the edges, with a broken latch that still clicked from habit. I opened it with my gloved hands. Inside papers wrapped in a grocery bag, labeled, House Mother House Legal 1980s. I sat on the floor, cross-legged like a child, unwrapped the bundle 1 sheet at a time. First a letter from my mother. Dated 1981, the week before our wedding. S. Dolores, keep these copies. You never know how people change when money grows old. Love doesn't always outlive fear. Sen. Then the trust document. Signed and notarized. My parents had transferred the land deed to me in 1979, but with one restriction. X. This land and its proceeds shall remain under the sole ownership of Dolores Hartley, unless transferred under mutual consent or nullified by breach of fidelity. I paused. Fidelity. Such a delicate word. Clean, crisp until it cuts. I turned the next page. Our prenup. 5 pages. Signed at City Hall. I'd forgotten it even existed. Back then, Walter said, I don't care what's yours or mine. I just want us. And I believed him. Clause 7 was underlined S. In the event of infidelity or marital fraud, the violating party waives all claim to inheritance, assets, and real estate tied to the Whitfield family estate. I stared at the ink. Dark, steady. Like it knew something I hadn't back then. It wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. And I had almost forgotten I was allowed to protect myself. I held the papers closer to the attic light. The signature was real, his handwriting still rounded and confident. He hadn't hesitated. I stood slowly, knees popping, joints resisting. But my spine straightened. That night, I scanned every page, labeled the folder, legal grounds, quiet use only. I saved it to 2 USBs. One I hid in the sewing box. The other I pinned inside the hem of my church coat. The next morning, I called a number I wasn't sure still worked. Harold Kramer. The voice answered. Mr. Kramer. I said. This is Dolores Hartley. You helped with my prenup in 1981. Silence. Then redhead Dolores, taught history, lemon bars at closing. I smiled. You remember. Never forget a client who baked. You all right, ma'am? I paused. I need to know if the clause still holds. His voice softened. It holds, especially if you've got the original. You do? I have a notarized copy. That'll do. I exhaled. Can we meet? I asked. You still in Peoria? Wes. Thursday at 10. I'll bring coffee. I wrote it down in my notebook. Next to a new section I'd labeled, Supper's Proof, sore words. The rest of that week, I didn't say anything to Walter or Vanessa. They assumed my silence meant surrender. Let them. Walter left mail unopened on the entry table. Vanessa rearranged the living room again. Moved my chair to better lighting. Emma noticed. Grandma, she whispered. Why are they always changing your stuff? I bent down to tie her shoelace. Whispered back, because they think quiet means invisible. She looked confused. But you're the loudest when you don't talk. I blinked. Pulled her into a hug. Didn't let go until I felt steady again. Wednesday night, I ironed my blouse for the meeting, buttoned it carefully. Checked the USB twice. Walter peeked in. Going somewhere tomorrow. Just errands, I said. Groceries, fabric store. He nodded. Want me to drive? No need. He left without asking more. At 10 a.m. sharp, I walked into Kramer and Hill, attorneys at law. The lobby smelled like old paper and eucalyptus. Harold hadn't aged much, just shrunk slightly. He wore suspenders and smiled like a man who still liked his job. He reviewed the papers, line by line, nodded 3 times. Dolores, this clause is gold. If he's violated it, and you can prove it, he's out. I'm not ready to go to court, I said. He leaned back. Then don't. But keep this close. This isn't revenge. It's record keeping. I like that. Record keeping. As if justice was just another ledger entry. We parted with a handshake. He slipped me a business card with a handwritten note. I see more than people think. Call when ready. I walked home the long way. Past the library, past the diner where Walter proposed. Past the antique store where I'd once bought his Father's Day watch. None of it hurt. It just belonged to then. Not now. That night, I put the prenup back in its new envelope. Taped it shut. Wrote to us. Let the record reflect. I remembered who I was. Severs. I placed it inside the cedar box Emma had painted for me 2 years ago. Tucked it beneath a quilt. Let them talk. Let them plan. I was no longer on defense. And I never needed permission to hold the truth. The folder was blue. Not navy, not pale. Just blue, simple enough to ignore, sturdy enough to carry what mattered. I placed it in my tote, between a paperback and my knitting, then tied a ribbon around the tote handle, so I wouldn't forget which side held the truth. Vanessa picked me up at 10:02 a.m. Her SUV smelled like coffee and lavender air freshener. She wore a pearl-studded blouse and matte lipstick. "You ready?" she chirped. "As I'll ever be," I said. Walter was already at the law office. He didn't wait in the lobby. Didn't greet me. Just waved from behind a glass door where the assistant was laying out pens. "Just some final signatures," Vanessa said, "to clean things up." Clean. They loved that word. Clean. Simple. Efficient. I followed them into the conference room. It was cold. The table gleamed. The fluorescent lights buzzed above like flies. Stephen was there. That surprised me. He sat at the far end, scrolling his phone. Didn't look up until I took my seat. "Hi, Mom," he said. Quick, distant. I nodded. The lawyer, a woman in her 30s with smart shoes and too much eye makeup, began to speak. "Today's meeting is to finalize the full reassignment of the Hartley estate and liquid assets into a consolidated trust, overseen jointly by Mr. Walter Hartley and Mrs. Vanessa Hartley." She smiled like it was an honor. I waited. She slid a stack of papers toward me. "If you'll begin with the signature on page 1. Vanessa leaned in. "There's a tab where you sign." So easy. I didn't move. Instead, I reached into my tote, took out the blue folder, laid it flat. Walter's jaw tensed. Vanessa's smile flickered. I opened the folder. No drama, no rustle. First, the trust letter from 1980, then the prenup, then the notarized copy of the inheritance clause. 3 pages, all dated, all signed. I slid them across the table. 1, 2, 3. I didn't speak. The lawyer blinked. Took the first page. Read, then the second. Slower. Walter cleared his throat. "What is this?" he asked. Vanessa leaned forward. "What are you doing, Dolores?" I met her eyes. "Rating," I said, and remembering. Stephen looked confused. The lawyer looked concerned. She flipped the last page, ran a finger along the signature. This is legally binding," she said quietly. Vanessa laughed, sharp, defensive. "Are you serious? This is from the 80s. This is ancient." The lawyer shook her head. "Unless formally revoked, it stands. The fidelity clause is explicit." As Stephen finally spoke. What fidelity clause?" I turned to him. "In 1981, your father signed a document. It said that if he ever betrayed this marriage, he forfeits any claim to the Hartley estate." Stephen stared at Walter. "Dad?" Walter said nothing. Vanessa leaned back, arms crossed. "This is vindictive." I raised an eyebrow. "No. This is recorded." The lawyer looked at me. "Do you intend to file for breach?" "Not today," I said. Vanessa scoffed. "Then why bring it here?" I smiled. "So you don't waste ink." Silence. The assistant had stopped typing. Walter shifted in his chair. "Dolores," he said, "we've built a life. Shared everything." "No," I said softly. "I built the life. You rearranged it." Stephen looked down. Vanessa whispered, "You're going to destroy this family over a technicality." I looked at her. Families aren't destroyed by documents. They're destroyed by decisions. No one replied. I took a pen from my tote cap, unmoved. "I won't sign," I said. The lawyer nodded. "Then the trust cannot be enacted." I stood. "Thank you." Vanessa looked at Walter. "Do something?" He looked tired, older than I remembered. He didn't speak. I picked up my blue folder, tucked it back into my bag. As I reached the door, Stephen rose. "Mom." His voice cracked. I paused, looked back, met his eyes. "I'm still your mother," I said. "That hasn't changed." He sat back down. Outside, the sky was soft gray. A breeze moved through the trees like a warning. I walked slowly, each step deliberate, quiet. At the corner cafe, I bought myself a lemon bar, then walked to the park. I sat on a bench, pulled out my notebook. Rotars. Today, I was not small. I did not beg. I did not cry. I held the truth in paper and silence. I underlined it twice, then added, "Let them spin. Let them scramble. I am still." So back home, I placed the blue folder in my sewing drawer, under the needles. under the scissors, where I keep sharp things. And when Emma came by that afternoon, I made her cocoa. Let her pick her favorite mug. Grandma, she said, why are you smiling with your eyes? I kissed her hair. Because today, I said, I remembered how to protect something. She didn't ask what, just hugged me harder. And the house felt more mine than it had in years. The cottage sat at the edge of town, where mailboxes were hand-painted and porches had wind chimes. It had white shutters, a creaky swing, and a patch of marigolds stubborn enough to bloom through gravel. I signed the lease quietly, paid in full with money they never got to touch. Walter never called. Vanessa didn't ask. Stephen sent a card with no return address. It simply read, I understand now. I packed light. Books, quilts, the blue folder, and Emma's crayon note. The first night alone, I lit a candle and boiled tea in a tin kettle. The sound filled the kitchen like breath. No one told me to turn the lights off. No one moved my chair. Freedom is not loud. It is not fireworks. It's a lemon bar at midnight and socks without holes. I named the place Hartley Home Place. Not out of ego, out of memory. I pinned a note to the door. For women who've been told they were too much or too quiet. Come in, sit down, stay a while. Sue, I didn't expect anyone. But by the third week, someone knocked. Her name was Edith. Widowed. She cried into her coffee and left me a pie tin. Then came Gloria, divorced, brought paintbrushes and rearranged the porch plants. Then May. Then Ruth. Then someone who never gave her name. Just left a letter tucked into the mailbox. Thank you for making space for the rest of us. DOS, I didn't advertise. I didn't charge. They came. They stayed. They watered the plants. Sometimes we just sat, no need for speeches. One morning, Emma arrived with a backpack and a question. Can I stay the weekend? Of course, I said. No code on the fridge. She laughed. We baked banana bread. She read Nancy Drew out loud. At night, she slept on the daybed under the old quilt her great-grandmother made. On Sunday, we picked blueberries from a neighbor's bush. She wore my sun hat, too big for her head. As we walked back, she asked, Grandma, is this your house now? I paused, then knelt beside her. No, honey. This is just a piece of earth I'm keeping warm, until the right hands are ready to hold it. She looked at me for a long time. Then nodded. Years from now. She won't remember the words, but she'll remember the quiet. The kind that says you belong. Even when the world forgets to make room. Even when they rewrite the story, even then, you hold your ground. The envelope was purple. No return address. Just my name, Grandma Dolores. Written in uneven print and glitter pen. It arrived on a Thursday, tucked between a utility bill and a flyer for window replacements. I knew the handwriting. I knew the crooked D. The little smiley face above the in Dolores. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it carefully, slipping one finger beneath the seal like it was a curtain. The paper smelled faintly of strawberry lotion. Inside 2 pages, stapled, folded once. The kind of letter kids write before they forget how. It began. Yes, dear Grandma, I miss your banana bread. Dad says we can't bake here because it gets too hot, but I think he's just bad at baking. Thank you for letting me stay. I liked your quilt. It smells like rain and old stories. I told my friend Riley about your house. She said it sounds like a secret fort for grown-ups. I said no. It's a soft place, like inside a book but real. I stopped reading. Took a deep breath, ran my thumb across the ink. She had drawn a tiny picture of the cottage. Lopsided shutters, smoke from the chimney. 2 stick figures holding mugs. Below it, she continued. I heard Mommy say bad stuff. She said you're being stubborn. She said you used to be nice, but I think you're still nice. Just quiet in a strong way. I asked Daddy if I could see you soon. He said maybe. I hope maybe means yes. The handwriting got smaller at the end. Love, Emma. P.S. I left a rock under your porch. It's shaped like a heart. Don't step on it. I folded the letter, then unfolded it again. Read it twice more, slowly. The tears came like rain on dry earth, quiet, then steady. Not sobs. Just the body remembering softness. I held the paper against my chest. felt my heart beat through hers, and I thought of my mother. The day she handed me the box of documents, the way she said, "You won't need these until you do. And then you'll be glad you have them." I hadn't understood her then, now I did. We don't pass down recipes or jewelry, not really. We pass down the right to say I deserve peace. I walked out to the porch. The wind was soft. The marigolds nodded like old friends. I bent down and looked beneath the third step. There it was, a small gray rock, heart-shaped if you tilted your head. I picked it up, brushed off the dirt, placed it on the windowsill next to the blue glass bird. Then I went inside, opened my sewing drawer, took out the blue folder. Inside the prenup, the trust letter, the affidavit. I didn't change anything. Just added a post-it to the front. Emma, when ready. I didn't know if she'd ever need it, didn't want her to. But if she did, it would be there. Quiet, steady, like the women before her. Her name was Margaret. She lived 2 doors down, drove a red station wagon with a cracked taillight and a bumper sticker that said "Make tea, not excuses." I liked her instantly. She knocked on my door one Tuesday morning, held a warm loaf of zucchini bread and a smile that didn't overreach. I figured it was time I said hello properly. She said, "Mind if I come in?" "Only if you leave that bread," I joked. She laughed, stepped inside, wore gardening gloves and smelled like rosemary. We sat on the porch, plates balanced on our knees. 2 women who'd seen too many Aprils and not enough peace. About halfway through her second slice, she asked, "So what brings you here?" She didn't say it with judgment. Not like "What happened to you?" More like "What path did you walk to get here?" I took a slow sip of tea, then said, "I used to live in a house with 3 bathrooms, 4 bedrooms, and not one safe room to cry in." She paused. "My husband," I continued, "was the kind of man who never yelled, but still made sure you stayed small." She didn't nod, didn't interrupt. "And my daughter-in-law?" I said. Thought control meant competence. I looked at the wind chime. It barely moved. They didn't hit me. Didn't curse me. They just erased me. Bit by bit, Margaret exhaled. I smiled, not sadly, just real. "So I left," I said, "not to hurt them, but to stop disappearing." She set her plate down. "My God?" she whispered. I thought it was just me. I looked at her. "It never is." She told me her story too. Of a brother who took the family land. Of a husband who remarried before the divorce finalized. Of friends who changed subjects every time she mentioned sadness. We sat in that long silence that only women of our age know how to keep. Then she asked, softly, "Do you ever want to go back? Make them see?" I shook my head. "No, dear. They saw me just fine. They just chose not to look too long." Margaret brushed a crumb off her lap. "So what do you want now?" I looked out past the porch, at the marigolds swaying slow. "I want Emma to know," I said, "that silence can mean power. That you don't have to scream to make space. That healing doesn't ask for permission." She smiled. "A different kind." "Would you mind if I came by again?" she asked. "Only if you bring more bread." That afternoon, I wrote in my notebook, "The truth doesn't need volume. It just needs witnesses." Seconds, and Margaret became mine. She didn't call, didn't text, just pulled up in a silver sedan that didn't belong to her. I saw her from the kitchen window, where I was slicing lemons for tea. She stepped out slowly, hair tied back, no heels, just flat shoes and a knit cardigan too clean for the country. I didn't open the door. Not right away. She knocked once, then again. I opened on the 3rd knock. "Hi," she said, voice too calm. "Vanessa," I said. She looked down at her hands. "No ring. Can I come in?" "This porch has chairs," I replied. She hesitated, then sat. I poured tea, brought out 2 mugs, set one down beside her. She stared at the lemon slice floating in the steam. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I didn't think you were." A long silence. She tapped her cup, didn't sip. "I thought maybe we could talk. Clear the air." I waited. "I know things got messy," she said, "and maybe I didn't handle everything the best way." I tilted my head. Messy is when you drop a bowl of sugar. This was deliberate. She looked like she might protest. Then didn't. I was angry, she said. About a lot. Stephen and I were struggling. You were always this presence. Calm. It made me feel less. I sipped my tea. That was never my goal. I know, she said quickly. But it's how I felt. Another pause. I didn't mean to hurt you. I looked out to the field. 2 butterflies danced near the marigolds. But you did, I said. Yes. We sat with that truth between us. She straightened her shoulders. Would you ever consider starting over? I smiled softly. Vanessa, this isn't a house for power. It's a house for peace. You don't have to stay, but you don't get to shape it. Her jaw tightened. But she nodded. I understand. She stood. I just thought I should try. I stood too. I'm glad you came. She walked to the car, hands stiff, paused at the door. Stephen says Emma misses you. I nodded. I miss her too. Then she left. No hug. No apology that fixed things. Just the soft click of a door that knew it wouldn't open again. Inside, I poured out her untouched tea. Washed the cup. Set it back on the shelf. One more dish clean. One more chapter closed. The envelope was blue, lined with silver. Inside a card with balloons and glitter glue. Emma's handwriting again, larger this time. Grandma, I'm turning 10. I hope you can come. I saved a seat for you under the tree. Sheet below it, in Stephen's writing. Saturday, 2 p.m. backyard. If you're comfortable. I stared at that line for a long time. If you're comfortable. Not please come. Not I miss you. Just space. Just an opening. I baked lemon bars the night before. Used Emma's favorite pan. I wore my floral dress, the one with tiny cardinals near the collar. Emma once said they looked like birds whispering secrets. I arrived at 2:05. Not early. Not too late. Children's laughter filled the yard. Streamer ribbons danced in the breeze. Stephen saw me first. His face didn't break into a smile, but he didn't look away. He walked over, hands in his pockets. Hey, Mom, he said. Stephen. A pause. Not tense. Just careful. She'll be happy you came. I didn't come for her, I said gently. I came because I'm hers. He nodded. I get that now. He glanced toward the tree. A pink tablecloth fluttered beneath it. She saved you the best seat, he said. I walked over. Emma ran up, grinning, frosting on her cheek. Grandma, you came? I knelt, hugged her tight. I wouldn't miss it. We sat under the tree, played trivia, passed napkins, watched the clouds move slow. At one point, Stephen sat beside me. No words, just presence. Then softly, I didn't see it then. How much you held, how much we let go. I didn't answer. He turned. But I see now. And that was enough. I left before cake. Didn't wait for hugs, just kissed Emma's forehead and whispered, keep watching, sweetheart. She nodded like she understood. Back home, I wrote less. Sometimes healing comes in 3 words. No apology, no plea. Just I see now. I unfolded the letter for the 3rd time that morning. The ink was steady. My hand had not shaken when I wrote it. But now, holding it, I felt something shift. Not fear, not regret. Just weight. The kind of weight that tells you this is the last thing that truly needs saying. I slid the letter into the cedar box Emma had painted for me. Bright pink with uneven daisies. It was the same box where I kept everything that mattered. The blue folder with legal papers, Emma's first crayon card, a Polaroid of my mother at the old stove. And now, this letter. It wasn't sealed. I didn't want it to be a mystery. Just a message, a map, maybe. Not of directions, but of reminders. Of what not to forget when the world tries to make you small. I began writing it 2 weeks ago. After Stephen's quiet sentence. I see now. After the birthday party under the tree and the unspoken warmth of my granddaughter's hug. After the final echo of Vanessa's shoes on my porch. This letter was the only thing left to do. Dear Emma, if you're holding this, I'm likely gone, or too forgetful to remember why I wrote it. Either way, this is for you. Not as a goodbye, but as a passing on. I never liked the phrase passing down. It sounds too much like surrender. Like laying yourself flat. No, dear. We don't pass down. We pass forward. You come from women who made peace in quiet kitchens, who stitched strength into hymns, who held anger in one hand and service in the other. But I need you to know, service is not silence, and love should never ask for your erasure. I stayed too long in a house where I was not wanted. I smiled through dinners where my voice was background noise. I was the calendar keeper, the sock folder, the keeper of peace no one respected. It took me decades to realize that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of self. You are allowed to want space. You are allowed to keep your name whole. They might say you're being difficult. They might call you stubborn. Let them. They called me forgetful. They called me sweet. They called me quaint. But never right. And I was. Right to leave. Right to say no. Right to stay silent when the room asked me to beg. You don't need to shout to be heard. But don't confuse quiet with shrinking. Silence is a tool. Use it when it suits you, not when it suits them. Keep a folder. Write things down. Not just because you might need them in court, but because someday your own hands may shake, and you'll want proof that you once stood steady. If you ever feel lost, look in the mirror and ask, would I let someone I love live like this? If the answer is no, get up. You don't need permission. You don't need drama. You need a lemon bar and your shoes. And go. Go to the porch, to the page, to the quiet place you've made with your own hands. Some people will tell you you're being oversensitive, too proud, too cold. Smile gently, set the tea, and leave the door open behind you as you walk out. Don't slam it. Let it close like a page turned, like a song ended, like a story that served its time. There's strength in not finishing every fight, in not proving yourself to those who never bothered to understand you. You don't owe the world forgiveness. You owe it honesty, and softness where it's earned. I hope this house, this little Hartley home place, teaches you that comfort can be claimed, that you don't need permission to be safe, that a porch swing and a mug of cocoa can heal more than some apologies ever will. You are not required to carry what broke your mother, or your father, or me. You are allowed to set it down, to say, this ends here. And when you do, know that somewhere, a woman who made banana bread and folded too many towels is smiling at your courage. I don't need statues. I don't need memories painted gold. I just need you to keep your name, your voice, your space. And if someday someone asks, who taught you to be like this? You can say, no one. I remembered. Or say, my grandmother. Either way, I'll be with you. 2. I folded the letter carefully, pressed the edge flat with my knuckle, labeled it in pencils for Emma. When she forgets who she is, I didn't seal the box. Didn't need to. If she ever opens it, she'll know exactly what she's looking for, and if she never does, that's fine too. It means she remembered all on her own. Outside, the marigolds bent in the wind. The light was soft, golden, forgiving. I didn't feel sad, not even old. I felt clear. And that, I decided, was the last gift I had to give. Let them forget my name. Let them rewrite the past. She'll remember the letter, and the day she reads it. I hope she hears my voice, saying ours. Let them hear you without a sound. If you've made it this far, thank you. Dolores' story may be fictional, but the quiet pain she carried is real for many women like her. If this story touched something in you, a memory, a feeling, or a truth long buried, don't keep it in. Leave a comment below. Would you have forgiven? Or let them sign first? We'd love to hear your take. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe to Was En Reddit Story. This is a space where women 55 fav aren't background characters. They're the ones holding the pen. You are seen, you are remembered, and you are never alone.